How does a mother choose a man over her own child? How does a little boy survive when the one person who should love him most walks away? On a cold night in Houston, 6-year-old Ethan watched his mother disappear, leaving him behind in a world he didn't understand. Alone, scared, forgotten. But fate had other plans, because sometimes the people who save us are the ones we least expect. Dear family, which country are you watching from? Leave a comment below and don't forget to subscribe to support us. Now let's get started. The city hummed with life, but for Rachel, the night had never felt so suffocating. The damp streets of Houston, Texas, still glistening from an earlier rain, stretched endlessly before her as she hurried forward. Neon lights flickered above the sidewalks, casting long, distorted reflections on the pavement. The distant sound of cars, muffled voices, and occasional bursts of laughter from strangers only made the silence between her and the little boy beside her feel heavier. Ethan trotted alongside her, struggling to keep up with her quickened pace. His tiny hand, warm and trusting, clung to hers, but Rachel barely felt it. Her mind was elsewhere, on the life she was about to leave behind, on the man waiting for her at the other end of this decision, and on the weight of what she was about to do. The boy's breath was ragged from trying to match her stride. "Mommy, where are we going?" His voice, soft and unsure, barely rose above the city's murmur. His big brown eyes, filled with innocence, searched her face for an answer. Rachel's grip tightened around his fingers before she forced herself to let go. She couldn't look at him. Not now. If she did, she might hesitate. She might crumble. And she couldn't afford that. Not when Greg had made it clear. There is no room for a child in this new life. Her heart pounded against her ribs. The expensive red dress she wore, a gift from Greg, felt too tight, as if it was suffocating her. The heels she had worn for him earlier now sank into small puddles, splattering cold water onto her calves. Every step toward the bus station felt heavier, as though an invisible force was pulling her backward, begging her to stop. But she couldn't stop. The station loomed ahead, its flickering fluorescent lights buzzing in the night. A handful of people waited inside, some dozing on benches, others hunched over their luggage. It smelled of damp concrete, stale coffee, and cheap cologne. A loudspeaker crackled above, announcing a departure to San Antonio, but the words barely registered in Rachel's mind. She knelt in front of Ethan, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. His cheeks were flushed from the cold, his tiny chest rising and falling rapidly. She forced a smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "You'll be safe, sweetie," she whispered. Her hands trembled as she cupped his face, her thumbs tracing the soft skin of his cheeks. "Someone will take care of you." Ethan's brow furrowed in confusion. "But you take care of me." Rachel's throat tightened. Then, as if realizing something was terribly wrong, his small hands grasped at her dress, his fingers curling into the fabric like he could anchor her to him. "Mommy, no!" His voice cracked with panic. "Please don't leave me. I'll be good, I promise. I won't be in the way." His tiny sobs cut through the noise of the station like a knife. People turned their heads, but no one intervened. It was just another scene in a city full of forgotten stories. Rachel's vision blurred, the weight of his words pressing against her chest. A voice echoed in her mind, Greg's voice, cool and unwavering. "You can't have both, Rachel. It's either me or him." Her breath came in short gasps. This is for the best. That's what she told herself. With a sudden, almost desperate motion, she wrenched his hands away from her dress and stood up. Ethan stumbled back, his face twisted in devastation, his arms still reaching for her. Rachel spun on her heel, her steps unsteady as she walked toward the waiting black car parked by the curb. Behind her, Ethan screamed, "Mommy!" She gritted her teeth, her hands fisting at her sides to stop herself from turning around. "Don't look back. Don't look back." The car door opened. She stepped inside, her fingers trembling as she pulled it shut. Greg sat beside her, his expression unreadable as he shifted into gear. "It's done?" Rachel swallowed hard, staring straight ahead as the city blurred past the window. She could still hear Ethan's cries echoing in her ears. She nodded. Greg reached over and squeezed her hand, but she barely felt it. As the car pulled away, Rachel finally gave in and glanced at the rearview mirror. There, under the harsh glow of the bus station lights, Ethan stood on the sidewalk, his small body trembling, his arms outstretched, calling for her one last time. And then, just like that, he was gone. Ethan stood frozen on the sidewalk, his small frame trembling as the taillights of his mother's car faded into the night. His tiny hands, still damp from her touch, curled into fists against the biting cold. A sharp wind swept through the street, cutting through his thin sweater like a blade. But the icy emptiness in his chest was far worse. He could still feel the warmth of her hand, still hear the rustling of her dress as she pulled away from him. But now she was gone. He blinked rapidly, trying to understand what had just happened. The streetlights overhead buzzed faintly, their flickering glow casting elongated shadows on the wet pavement. The sounds of the city pulsed around him, honking cars, distant laughter, the rhythmic tapping of hurried footsteps. But everything felt far away, as if he were trapped inside a silent, invisible bubble. He swallowed hard, his throat raw, his breath coming in uneven gasps. "Mommy?" The word barely left his lips before it was swallowed by the hum of the city. His voice was small, fragile, almost insignificant against the vastness of the world around him. People passed by, strangers lost in their own lives, their own problems, their own hurried routines. A woman in a business suit clutched her purse tightly and looked straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge him. A man in a hoodie flicked a cigarette onto the ground and walked on without a glance. A couple, their arms intertwined, laughed softly at some private joke, their world undisturbed by the sight of a crying child alone in the night. Ethan took a shaky step forward, his legs weak beneath him. Maybe she would come back. Maybe she had just forgotten something and would return any second now. He turned his head toward the street, eyes wide with desperate hope, scanning every car that passed. Any one of them could be hers, but none of them were. Tears burned at the corners of his eyes, hot against his chilled skin. He wiped at them furiously, as if forcing them away would somehow make him stronger. His mother had always told him to be brave, but how could he be brave when she had left him? His fingers tightened around the worn-out teddy bear tucked under his arm, its fur matted and frayed from years of being loved too much. He pressed it to his chest, holding it like a shield against the growing terror inside him. The minutes stretched into hours. The world around him continued, oblivious to the fact that his entire life had just fallen apart. A bus pulled up to the curb, its brakes hissing as passengers shuffled off. A man with a newspaper tucked under his arm glanced at Ethan, hesitated for the briefest moment, then shook his head and kept walking. No one stopped. No one asked. The cold seeped into his bones, making his teeth chatter. He looked around for a place to go, some corner where he wouldn't feel so exposed. His gaze landed on a wooden bench beneath a flickering street lamp. With slow, dragging steps, he made his way over and curled up against the armrest, tucking his knees to his chest. The bench was hard and unforgiving, but it was the closest thing to shelter he had. He hugged his teddy bear tighter, burying his face into its fur, breathing in the faint, familiar scent of home, of safety, of bedtime stories, of a mother who once held him close. But she wasn't here now. A shiver racked his small body as the wind howled through the streets. His fingers, now stiff with cold, clutched desperately at the teddy bear's tiny arms. For the first time in his life, Ethan was truly alone. The city had settled into the quiet rhythm of late night. Its earlier chaos softened into the occasional honk of a distant car or the low murmur of street sweepers gliding over wet pavement. The air was thick with the lingering scent of rain, oil, and faded cigarette smoke. Somewhere in the distance, a neon sign flickered in and out of existence, its buzzing hum blending with the steady drip of water from a rusted fire escape. Jack was used to walking home in the dark. The streets of Houston, worn and familiar, held no fear for him. At 58, with calloused hands and a back that ached from too many years bent over car engines, he had learned to move through life at his own pace. The night had never seemed particularly lonely to him until now. As he rounded a corner, his boots splashed into a shallow puddle, sending ripples across the reflection of the streetlights above. That was when he saw the boy. Curled up on a bench, a child barely 6 years old sat shivering, his thin arms wrapped tightly around a worn-out teddy bear. His sweater, damp from the night air, clung to his small frame. His head was tucked down, forehead resting against his knees as if making himself smaller would somehow shield him from the world. Jack slowed his steps, his eyes narrowing beneath his thick brows. He had seen a lot in his life. People coming and going, folks losing everything they had, men broken by choices they couldn't undo. But a kid sitting alone on the street at this hour? That wasn't something he could just walk past. He cleared his throat, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "Hey, kid, you lost?" Ethan flinched at the sudden sound, his head snapping up, his eyes wide, brown, and filled with something deeper than fear, locked onto Jack's face. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just sat there, frozen, like a deer caught in headlights. Jack sighed and took a slow step forward, careful not to spook him. "It's okay," he said, this time softening his tone. "I won't hurt you." Ethan's fingers curled tighter around his teddy bear. His lips parted slightly as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. His small chest rose and fell with quick, shallow breaths. Jack crouched down to eye level, his old knees creaking in protest. He wasn't good with kids, never had been, but he knew fear when he saw it. He had seen it in men on the brink of losing everything, in stray dogs too used to being kicked, and now in this little boy, alone on a bench with nowhere to go. "Where's your folks?" Jack asked. Ethan swallowed hard. The answer was there, on the tip of his tongue, but speaking it aloud would make it too real, would force him to admit that she wasn't coming back, that he had been left behind. Jack exhaled through his nose, shifting his weight slightly. He didn't need an answer to know what had happened. He had seen enough lost souls in his lifetime to recognize one now. He extended a weathered hand, palm up, finger steady. "Come on, kid. Let's get you somewhere warm." Ethan stared at the hand for a long time. The skin was rough, calloused from years of hard work, strong but not cruel, not like Greg, not like the hands that had pushed him aside, that had driven away without looking back. His lip trembled, his tiny fingers flexed over his teddy bear's arm. His heart pounded in his chest, torn between fear and the overwhelming need for someone, anyone, to hold on to. The city hummed around them, indifferent to the moment unfolding between the two. Jack didn't move, didn't rush him. And then, after what felt like forever, Ethan reached out. His small, trembling fingers slid into Jack's warm, steady grip. A silent plea, a fragile trust. Jack closed his hand around the boys with a firm but gentle hold, then stood up, bringing Ethan with him. "All right, kid," he murmured. "Let's get you home." The night air was crisp, carrying the lingering scent of rain and asphalt as Jack walked through the quiet streets with Ethan at his side. The city's distant hum still pulsed behind them, but here, in the dim glow of the streetlights, the world felt smaller, quieter. Ethan's tiny fingers clutched Jack's rough, calloused hand. He wasn't holding it for warmth, he was holding on. Jack could feel it in the way the boy's grip tightened every few steps, like he was afraid that if he let go, he'd be swallowed by the darkness around him. Jack didn't say much as they walked. He just kept his pace slow, letting the boy set his own rhythm. After a few blocks, they reached Jack's home, a modest one-story house with faded blue paint and a porch to swing that creaked softly in the wind. The front yard was small, a few overgrown bushes lining the walkway. Jack pushed open the wooden gate, its hinges groaning in protest, and led Ethan up the steps. "All right, kid," Jack muttered, fishing out his keys. "Let's get you inside." The door swung open with a familiar creak, revealing a space that was simple but lived in. The living room was cluttered. A well-worn recliner sat in the corner. A wooden coffee table was buried under car magazines and an old radio, and along the wall a dusty shelf sagged under the weight of books that didn't quite fit a mechanic's image. The air carried the scent of motor oil, old paper, and something faintly warm, like coffee that had been brewed hours ago. Ethan hesitated in the doorway. The warmth inside was a sharp contrast to the cold streets, but stepping in felt too real, like accepting something he wasn't ready for. Jack, sensing the hesitation, nudged the door open wider. "It ain't fancy, but it beats a park bench." Ethan took a tentative step inside. The floorboards creaked under his small weight, and he flinched slightly at the sound. He stayed close to the door, his fingers tightening around his teddy bear. Jack sighed and rubbed a hand over his beard. The kid was skittish, and he didn't blame him. Trust wasn't something that came easy when you'd been left behind. "All right," Jack said, pushing up his sleeves. "Bet you're hungry." He didn't expect an answer, but Ethan's stomach gave him one anyway. A low, desperate growl that filled the quiet space between them. Jack smirked. "Thought so." He made his way to the kitchen, flicking on the overhead light. The place wasn't much. A small table with two mismatched chairs, a fridge covered in faded receipts, and countertops that had seen better days. He pulled out a pan, dropped a slab of butter in, and let it sizzle before tossing in 2 slices of bread and a thick layer of cheese. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching warily. A few minutes later, Jack slid a grilled cheese sandwich onto a plate and set it down on the table, along with a glass of milk. "Go on, kid. You need it." Ethan stared at it, his stomach twisted, not just from hunger, but from something deeper. Was he allowed to eat this? The sandwich sat there, warm and waiting. Jack didn't say anything else. He just took a seat across from the boy, nursing a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold hours ago. He knew that look in Ethan's eyes. A part of him was still waiting. Another long moment passed before Ethan finally reached out. His small hands trembled as he picked up the sandwich. The first bite was hesitant, careful, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to eat it. Then the second bite came faster. Then another. The hunger took over. He ate in quick, desperate bites, as if the food might disappear if he didn't finish fast enough. The warm cheese, the buttery crisp of the bread. It was simple, but it was comfort. Jack watched, letting him have this moment. When Ethan finally slowed down, his shoulders relaxed slightly. He wasn't full, not really. There was a deeper hunger inside him, one that food couldn't fix. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't empty either. Jack stood up, stretching his aching back. "All right, kid, let's get you settled." The guest room was small, tucked in the back of the house. A twin bed sat against the wall, the blankets neatly folded, untouched. The dresser was old but sturdy, its surface bare except for a lamp that cast a soft glow across the room. Ethan stood in the doorway, his eyes scanning the space cautiously. Jack walked over and pulled back the covers. "Go ahead." Ethan hesitated before finally climbing onto the bed. He curled up beneath the thick quilt, his teddy bear tucked under his chin. Jack grabbed an extra blanket from the closet and draped it over him, tucking the edges in. For a second, his hand hovered over the boy's small shoulder, uncertain. Then with a sigh, he rested it there. A brief, firm touch. "You're safe here, kid." Ethan didn't respond, but as Jack turned to leave, he heard it, a small, barely audible exhale. By the time Jack closed the door, Ethan was already asleep. Ethan stirred beneath the heavy quilt, his small body cocooned in its warmth. For a fleeting moment, his mind tricked him into believing he was back home, in his own bed, with the scent of his mother's perfume lingering in the air. His fingers brushed against something soft, his teddy bear. His mother must have tucked him in the night before, like she always did. Maybe she was in the kitchen now, humming while making pancakes. Maybe last night had just been a bad dream. But then he opened his eyes. The ceiling above him was unfamiliar. Plain, slightly cracked, with the paint peeling near the edges. The room was small, the walls bare, except for a single old clock ticking steadily. The air smelled different too, faintly of coffee and something fried. Nothing like the lavender-scented candles his mother used. Then it hit him. She wasn't here. Ethan sat up abruptly, his breath catching in his throat. The events of the previous night crashed down on him with the weight of a boulder. The station, the car pulling away, the desperate cries that went unanswered. His hands tightened around the teddy bear, his fingers gripping its worn fabric as if it were the only thing keeping him from falling apart. A soft clinking of dishes echoed from the other room. He slid out of bed, his bare feet touching the cool wooden floor. Slowly, cautiously, he stepped into the hallway, following the sound. Jack was in the kitchen, standing over the stove, flipping eggs in a cast-iron skillet. The old radio on the counter hummed with the faint sound of country music. the kind that told stories of loss and heartbreak. The kitchen was filled with the comforting scent of butter and toast, the kind of smell that made a house feel like home. Jack glanced over his shoulder and gave Ethan a nod. "Morning, kid." Ethan didn't answer. He just stood there watching. Jack plated the eggs, added a few strips of bacon, and set the plate down at the small kitchen table. He pulled out a chair and gestured toward it. "Come on, eat up. Got some toast too." Ethan hesitated before slowly shuffling forward. He climbed into the chair but didn't reach for the food. His eyes stayed on the front door, as if expecting it to swing open any second. Jack leaned against the counter, arms crossed. He had seen this look before, a quiet kind of waiting. "You can stay as long as you need, kid." His voice was even, not pushing, just offering. Ethan's fingers twitched around the edge of the table, but he still didn't speak. He wasn't sure how long he needed to stay, because part of him still believed his mother was coming back, that this was all temporary. Jack didn't press him. He just reached for his coffee and took a sip, letting the silence sit between them like an old friend. After a while, Ethan finally picked up his fork. He took a small bite, then another. He wasn't hungry, not really, but his body didn't seem to care. The food was warm, filling, and tasted better than anything he had eaten in a long time. Jack watched him for a moment, then grabbed his keys from the counter. "Gotta run to the store. Need a few things." He hesitated before adding, "Wanna come?" Ethan paused mid-bite. "Go outside? Be around people?" He thought about shaking his head, but staying here, just sitting in this quiet house waiting, seemed worse. He gave a small nod. Jack didn't make a big deal out of it. He just grabbed his jacket and held the door open. Outside, the morning sun had burned off the last traces of the night's chill. The truck was old, its paint faded, but it rumbled to life with a steady growl. Ethan climbed into the passenger seat, his small hands gripping the seatbelt strap as Jack pulled out of the driveway. The grocery store wasn't far, a small local place with handwritten signs and an old bell that jingled when they walked inside. The air smelled of fresh bread and ground coffee, and people bustled through the aisles with carts, chatting about the weather, their kids, their day. Ethan stuck close to Jack, his small footsteps barely making a sound on the tile floor. He kept his head down, his teddy bear still tucked under his arm. And then, a flash of red caught his eye. His breath hitched, his heart leapt into his throat. At the end of the aisle, a woman stood with her back to him, wearing a red dress. "Mom!" Ethan's body moved before he could think. He dropped his teddy bear and ran. "Mom!" His voice cracked, filled with raw hope, the kind that could break a person if they held onto it too tightly. "Mommy!" The woman turned. Ethan skidded to a stop. It wasn't her. His chest caved in, his legs suddenly feeling weak. The woman, startled, gave him a puzzled look before offering a small, polite smile. "Sorry, sweetie. Were you looking for someone?" Ethan's throat closed up. He shook his head quickly, blinking back tears, and stumbled backward. Jack was already there, his steady hand resting lightly on Ethan's shoulder. "Come on, kid," he said, his voice quiet, like he understood. "Let's go." Ethan let himself be guided away, but something inside him felt like it had shattered. She wasn't here. She wasn't coming back. The days turned into weeks. Ethan had settled into a quiet rhythm with Jack, though settled might have been too strong a word. He wasn't running anymore, wasn't waking up on cold benches or jumping at every shadow, but he wasn't home either. Jack didn't push him. He gave the kid space, let him figure things out at his own pace. Mornings were simple. Jack would make breakfast, usually bacon and eggs, while Ethan sat at the kitchen table, still half asleep, his teddy bear resting beside his plate. Then Jack would head to work at the garage, and Ethan would spend the day at the house, flipping through the old books Jack had or watching TV with the volume low. It wasn't perfect. Some nights Jack would hear the floorboards creak and find Ethan sitting by the front door, staring at it as if willing it to open. Other nights the boy would crawl onto the couch without a word, curling up with his teddy bear, and Jack would just throw a blanket over him. No questions asked, but the kid was safe, and for now that was enough, until Jack realized it wasn't. Jack took a deep breath and reached for his keys. "I gotta take care of something," he said. "You up for a ride?" Ethan looked up, hesitated, then gave a small nod. The drive into town was silent, except for the occasional hum of the truck's engine. Jack glanced at Ethan every so often in the rearview mirror, small hands folded in his lap, teddy bear clutched tight, staring out the window like he was watching for something. Or someone. Jack's jaw tightened. The kid needed answers. The office was in a part of town where the buildings had seen better days. The sign above the door read, Lisa Carter. Family Law, the paint slightly chipped but still clear enough to read. Jack parked the truck and turned to Ethan. "Come on, kid." Ethan hesitated. "Who lives here?" "Not a who, a what," Jack said, pushing open the door. "She's a lawyer." Inside, the office was small but tidy. Old wooden furniture, shelves lined with thick books, and the faint scent of coffee and paper. Behind the desk sat Lisa Carter, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and an air of no-nonsense authority. She glanced up as they entered, her expression softening slightly when she saw Ethan. "Well, well," she said, leaning back in her chair. "Didn't expect to see you here, Jack." "Didn't expect to be here," Jack admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "But I need your help." Lisa's gaze flickered to Ethan. "This about the kid?" Jack nodded. Lisa sighed, setting down her pen. "Jack, if you don't have legal custody, you know what that means, right?" Jack's jaw clenched. He knew exactly what it meant. "The system will take him," Lisa continued. "And once they do, there's no telling where he'll end up. A foster home, a shelter, maybe even back with his mother if she suddenly decides to fight for him." Ethan tensed beside Jack, his small fingers gripping the edge of his sweater. Jack exhaled slowly. "That's not gonna happen." Lisa studied him, her eyes searching his face. "You sure about this?" Jack didn't hesitate. "He's got nowhere else to go." Lisa tapped her fingers against the desk, thinking. Then she leaned forward, lowering her voice. "All right, first thing we need to do is find his mother. If she's out of the picture for good, we might have a shot at temporary guardianship. But if she comes back looking for him, it gets complicated." Jack frowned. "How do we find her?" Lisa opened a drawer, pulling out a yellow legal pad. "Give me a name." Jack turned to Ethan. "Kid?" Ethan swallowed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Rachel." Lisa scribbled it down. "Last name?" Ethan hesitated. He wasn't used to saying it out loud. It had always just been Mommy. "Dawson," he finally murmured. Lisa nodded. "All right, I'll start digging." She looked up at Jack. "But I'll be honest with you, if she doesn't want to be found, this could take time." Jack met her gaze unwavering. "Then we start now." Lisa glanced at Ethan again, then back at Jack. She saw something in his face, the look of a man who had already made up his mind. She sighed. "All right, Jack, let's see what we can do." The sky had begun to dim when Jack's truck pulled into his driveway. The golden hues of late afternoon stretched across the horizon, casting long shadows over the small house. Ethan sat in the passenger seat, staring down at his hands, his fingers absent-mindedly stroking the worn ear of his teddy bear. He hadn't said much since they left Lisa's office. Jack could tell the boy was thinking, the kind of thoughts a kid shouldn't have to think. Inside, the house was quiet except for the faint creak of the floorboards as Jack walked to the kitchen. He grabbed a beer from the fridge, hesitated, then set it back down. He wasn't in the mood for it. Instead, he poured himself a cup of coffee, black and strong, and leaned against the counter, staring at the phone on the wall. Lisa had promised to call as soon as she found something. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, his small frame almost swallowed by the oversized chair. He picked at the sleeve of his sweater, eyes darting toward the phone every few minutes. Jack exhaled and walked over. "How about some TV, kid?" Ethan shrugged. He didn't really care. Jack switched it on anyway, flipping through channels until he landed on something neutral. One of those nature documentaries with soothing narration, the kind of thing that filled the silence without demanding attention. Ethan curled up on the couch, his teddy bear tucked under his chin, his eyes fixed on the screen, but clearly somewhere else entirely. Then the phone rang. Jack was across the room in 2 strides, lifting the receiver before the second ring had even finished. "Yeah," Lisa's voice came through, steady but laced with something heavy. "Jack, I found her." Jack's grip on the phone tightened. He glanced at Ethan, making sure the boy wasn't listening too closely. But the kid wasn't stupid. His body had gone completely still, his little hands gripping his teddy bear just a bit tighter. Jack turned away slightly and lowered his voice. "What do you got?" Lisa sighed. "She's in bad shape, Jack. The guy she ran off with? Greg? He didn't stick around. As soon as the thrill wore off, he left her high and dry." Jack clenched his jaw. "Figures." "She's fallen hard," Lisa continued. "Addiction, debt, the kind of people you don't want knocking on your door. She's been bouncing between motels, but from what I hear, she's running out of places to go." Jack rubbed his hands over his face. Hearing those words from Lisa felt like a punch to the gut. Then a small voice from behind him. "Does this mean she's never coming back?" Jack turned. Ethan stood in the doorway, his brown eyes wide, pleading, afraid to hear the answer. Jack's chest tightened. He hated that the kid had to hear this. Hated that this was his life now, waiting for scraps of hope that might never come. He sighed, setting the phone back in its cradle. Then he crouched down, leveling himself with Ethan's height. "We're gonna find out, kid," he said, his voice steady. Ethan swallowed hard, his fingers curling into the fabric of his sweater. He nodded once, but didn't say anything. Jack could tell the boy wanted to believe in her, and that was the hardest part. The night was thick with silence, broken only by the distant hum of cars on the highway. Jack sat at the kitchen table, his coffee growing cold as he stared at the slip of paper in front of him, an address scribbled in Lisa's neat handwriting. Rachel had been found, a rundown motel on the outskirts of New Orleans, the kind of place where people checked in, but nobody asked questions. Jack exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. He had seen it before. People running from their past, making choices they couldn't undo, ending up in places they never imagined they'd be. But this wasn't just any lost soul. This was her. This was Ethan's mother. A soft rustling behind him made him glance up. Ethan stood in the doorway, his teddy bear tucked under one arm, his eyes flickering to the paper on the table. "You found her?" His voice was small, hesitant. Jack nodded. "Yeah, kid, we found her." Ethan swallowed hard. He didn't ask the next question out loud, but Jack could see it written all over his face. "Is she coming back for me?" Jack didn't have an answer for that. Instead, he pushed back his chair and stood. "Get some sleep. We're leaving in the morning." Ethan hesitated, then gave a small nod before padding back to his room. Jack sat back down and stared at the address a little longer. Tomorrow they would go find her. But what if they didn't like what they found? The bus station smelled of stale coffee and exhaust fumes, the kind of scent that clung to your clothes long after you left. Jack handed the driver their tickets while Ethan stood beside him, shifting on his feet. His small fingers twisted the fabric of his sweater, his nerves as visible as the morning sun spilling through the station's high windows. Jack nudged him gently. "Come on, kid." They boarded, sliding into seats near the middle. Ethan curled up by the window, pressing his forehead against the cool glass as the bus rumbled to life. For a while he just watched the city shrink behind them, his thoughts swirling like the scenery blurring past. She was just a few hours away now. His stomach churned. Would she be happy to see him? Would she scoop him up in her arms and say she had been looking for him all along? Or would she look past him, like he was just a reminder of something she wanted to forget? Jack shifted beside him, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a lollipop, unwrapped it, and held it out. Ethan blinked at it. "What's that for?" Jack shrugged. "Sometimes a little sweetness helps." Ethan hesitated, then took it. He popped it into his mouth, the sugary taste settling on his tongue, a small distraction from the storm inside him. Jack leaned back against the seat, arms crossed. Neither of them spoke. The bus rolled on, carrying them toward a reunion that neither of them knew how to prepare for. The motel was exactly what Jack had expected. A crumbling, low-rent place that smelled of cigarette smoke and desperation. The neon sign above the entrance flickered, buzzing faintly against the humid New Orleans air. A couple of old cars sat in the parking lot, their rusted exteriors glinting under the dim streetlights. Jack took a slow breath, steadying himself. He glanced down at Ethan, whose small fingers clutched his teddy bear so tightly that its worn fur was pressed flat. The boy's brown eyes were wide, scanning the darkened windows, searching for her. Jack didn't have the heart to tell him that if Rachel was still here, this wasn't the kind of place where people waited with open arms. With a firm squeeze on Ethan's shoulder, Jack led him inside. The motel lobby was stale and dimly lit, the front desk cluttered with old newspapers and a cup of half-drunk coffee. A ceiling fan groaned overhead, barely stirring the thick air. Behind the counter sat a man in his late 60s, wearing a stained undershirt, his thin gray hair slicked back. He barely looked up from his crossword puzzle as Jack approached. Jack cleared his throat. "I'm looking for someone, Rachel Dawson." The man exhaled through his nose, flipping a page. "Lot of people come through here." Jack wasn't in the mood for games. He pulled a 20 from his wallet and slid it across the counter. "She was here. Where'd she go?" The man glanced at the money, then at Jack, weighing his options. With a sigh, he grabbed the bill and stuffed it into his pocket. "She left a few days ago. Took off with some guy. Tony." The name sent a ripple of unease through Jack's chest. "Tony who?" Jack pressed. The manager gave him a long, knowing look, the kind that said, "You don't want to go looking for him." "Don't know his last name. Doesn't matter. People around here just call him Tony. Big guy. Likes to be owed." He paused, then added, "Doesn't like when people don't pay up." Jack's jaw tightened. He didn't need a full biography to put the pieces together. Rachel had fallen into something bad. Worse than bad. Beside him, Ethan's breathing hitched. His small hand clutched Jack's sleeve. She left with him?" The boy's voice was barely a whisper. The manager sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Look, kid, people don't always make the best choices." Ethan's face went pale. His small chest rose and fell quickly, his mind no doubt racing to places Jack didn't want it to go. Jack crouched down in front of him, gripping his shoulders. "Look at me, kid." Ethan's big brown eyes filled with fear as he met Jack's gaze. "We're gonna find her," Jack said firmly. "Now." He wasn't sure if he was saying it for Ethan or for himself. Either way, he meant it. The streets of New Orleans were different at night. The city, usually alive with music and laughter, had its other side, one that hid in the dim glow of flickering streetlights and the damp air of back alleys. It was the kind of place where people whispered names instead of saying them out loud. Jack knew exactly what kind of man Tony was, and he wasn't about to let Ethan anywhere near him. "Stay here," Jack said, his voice firm as they stood near the entrance of a narrow alleyway. Ethan didn't argue. He just nodded, his small fingers gripping the sleeve of his hoodie. His eyes, wide and anxious, darted toward the alley's darkened path. Jack stepped forward alone. The stench of stale beer and rotting trash hung thick in the air. A couple of men leaned against the brick wall, cigarettes glowing between their fingers. But Jack wasn't looking for them. He was looking for him. And there he was, Tony. The man sat on a rusted folding chair, lazily flipping a pocket knife open and shut. He was big, bigger than Jack remembered from Lisa's description. Tattoos snaked up his arms, and his eyes held the calculated coldness of a man who had spent his life taking more than giving. Jack squared his shoulders. He'd dealt with men like Tony before. Tony looked up, a slow smirk spreading across his face. "Well now, you're either real brave or real stupid to come looking for me." Jack ignored the jab. "Where's Rachel?" Tony chuckled, twirling the knife between his fingers. "You her new knight in shining armor?" His gaze flickered past Jack, toward the street. "Or," his smirk deepened, "you with the kid?" Jack's jaw tightened. He took a step closer. "Where is she?" Tony sighed dramatically. "See, here's the thing, old man. Rachel, she ain't exactly free to go. She owes me." Jack knew what was coming before the words even left Tony's mouth. "You want her?" Tony leaned back, tapping the knife against his knee. "Pay her debt." Jack didn't hesitate. He pulled out his wallet and tossed every last bill inside onto the table beside Tony. Crumpled 20s, a few 50s, the last of what he had. Tony let out a slow whistle. Generous. He didn't touch the money. Jack's stomach coiled. It wasn't enough. The silence between them stretched, thick and dangerous. Tony tilted his head. "You think that's gonna cover what she owes?" He clicked his tongue. Nah, see, Rachel's got a real bad habit of making promises she can't keep. He leaned forward, voice dropping lower. And I don't let people walk away for free. Jack felt the heat rise in his chest, his fists clenching at his sides. He wasn't a violent man, not anymore. But if Tony pushed him, he'd learn real fast that Jack was not a man to be tested. Then, Tony laughed, low and slow. Relax, old man, he said, finally scooping up the money. Consider this a parting gift. Jack didn't move. Take her, Tony said, waving a hand dismissively, before I change my mind. Jack's muscles stayed tense as he turned on his heel and walked away. Ethan was still standing where Jack had left him, his eyes searching Jack's face the second he emerged from the alley. Did he? Jack exhaled, resting a hand on Ethan's shoulder. We got her, kid. The night was thick with humidity, the air heavy with the weight of something unspoken. Jack's truck rattled down the cracked roads leading toward the outskirts of the city, headlights slicing through the darkness. Beside him, Ethan sat rigid in his seat, small hands clenched in his lap. He hadn't said much since they left Tony, but Jack could feel the storm inside him. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something deeper. Jack pulled up to an old warehouse, its metal siding rusted, its windows long shattered, a place forgotten by the world, just like Rachel. Jack killed the engine. Stay close, kid. Ethan didn't answer, but he nodded, his breath unsteady. Jack pushed open the door, the warehouse creaking under its own weight as they stepped inside. The dim glow of a single flickering bulb cast long shadows against the concrete walls. The air smelled of stale sweat, dust, and something sour. And then he saw her. Rachel sat slumped against the far wall, barely more than a shadow of the woman she used to be. Her once vibrant hair was matted, her skin pale and stretched too thin. The designer clothes she had once flaunted were replaced by a stained sweatshirt 2 sizes too big, hanging off her frail frame. She was awake but empty, her gaze fixed on nothing. Ethan froze. Jack felt the boy's fingers clutch the fabric of his shirt, his breathing ragged. But then, in a voice so soft it almost disappeared into the walls, he spoke. Mom? Rachel's body tensed. Slowly, hesitantly, she turned, and when her eyes met Ethan's, everything else disappeared. Guilt flooded her face, real, raw, suffocating guilt. She didn't cry, didn't reach for him. She just stared, as if seeing him after all this time hurt more than anything else. Ethan, she rasped. Her voice was weak, broken. You shouldn't be here. Ethan's fingers tightened into fists. Jack didn't say a word. He just stepped back, letting the boy have this moment, letting him ask the question that had haunted him since the night she left. Ethan swallowed hard. His lip trembled, but his voice was steady when he finally spoke. Then why did you leave me? Rachel's breath hitched, a sharp, uneven gasp as Ethan's words hung in the empty space between them. Then why did you leave me? Her body shook. She wanted to look away, to shrink into the filth of the warehouse walls, to disappear like she had tried to do so many times before. But she couldn't. Not when Ethan was standing there, small but steady, fragile but unbroken. Tears welled in her bloodshot eyes as she pressed a trembling hand against her mouth. Her shoulders collapsed inward, and then, like a dam breaking, the sobs tore through her. I thought I was doing the right thing, she choked. I thought I was giving you a better life. Ethan flinched. Rachel's hands gripped her own arms, her nails digging into the thin fabric of her sweatshirt. Greg, he promised me things, a fresh start, a chance to leave all the struggle behind. Her breath came in shudders. But he didn't want you. He said we couldn't have a future if I kept you. Jack's jaw tightened, his fists curling at his sides. He already knew the story, but hearing it from her lips made it worse. Rachel let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. I told myself I was choosing a life where I could send for you someday, where I could be someone worthy of being your mom. She wrapped her arms around herself, rocking slightly. But the truth is, I was selfish. I wanted to believe in a dream, and I let it blind me. Ethan didn't move, didn't speak, but his small hands trembled at his sides. Rachel met his eyes, tears spilling freely. I was wrong, Ethan. I was so wrong. Silence stretched between them. Then, barely a whisper. I never stopped waiting for you. Rachel collapsed inward, her whole body shattering under the weight of those words. A guttural sob tore from her throat, raw and unfiltered. Jack let it play out. He let her break because sometimes you had to break completely before you could start putting yourself back together. When the sobs quieted, he took a step forward, his boots scraping against the concrete floor. His voice was calm, but firm. You've got a choice, Rachel. She looked up, her face streaked with tears, hollow with exhaustion. You can keep running, Jack said, or you can fight for something better. Rachel's breath hitched. Jack didn't sugarcoat it. It won't be easy. You're going to have to work for it. Prove you're not going to disappear again. Prove to him, he nodded toward Ethan, that he's not going to wake up one morning and find you gone. Rachel swallowed, her lips trembling. She looked at Ethan, her son, the boy she had abandoned, the boy who had still waited for her. Tears filled her eyes again, but this time there was something else beneath the sorrow, a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long, long time. Hope. The drive back to Houston was long and quiet. Rachel sat in the back of Jack's truck, arms wrapped tightly around herself, her gaze fixed on the passing scenery. She looked small, swallowed by the oversized sweatshirt she had borrowed from Jack. The city lights of New Orleans faded behind them, replaced by the endless stretch of highway. Ethan sat beside Jack in the front, staring out the window. He hadn't spoken much since they left the warehouse. His teddy bear rested in his lap, its worn fur clutched in his hands. Jack kept his eyes on the road, gripping the wheel. The hardest part wasn't finding Rachel. It was what came next. They pulled into Houston late in the evening, parking outside Lisa's office. The building's fluorescent lights buzzed softly against the night. Inside, Lisa was waiting, arms crossed, legal papers stacked neatly on her desk. Rachel hesitated at the entrance, as if stepping inside made everything real. Lisa didn't waste time. There's a rehab facility a few miles from here, she said. They've agreed to take you in. Full detox, counseling, the whole thing. Rachel let out a shaky breath. And if I don't go? Jack leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Then you keep running, and you lose him for good. Rachel's eyes flickered toward Ethan. He stood stiffly beside Jack, watching her carefully. Not with anger, not with trust, but something in between. Rachel swallowed. I don't know if I can change. Her voice was so soft, so fragile, like she was afraid to believe in the possibility. For the first time since they had found her, Ethan stepped forward. If you try, he hesitated, looking down at his bear. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. I'll wait for you. Rachel's breath caught. Jack glanced at Lisa. She gave a small nod. This was Rachel's decision. Finally, Rachel exhaled, her hands trembling. She turned to Lisa. Okay, she whispered. I'll go. For the first time in a long time, she chose to fight. The ride home felt different this time. Jack's truck rumbled down the familiar roads of Houston, past the old diners and gas stations, past the auto shop where he spent most of his days. The sky had begun its slow descent into dusk, streaks of orange and purple stretching across the horizon. Ethan sat beside him, quiet but not the same kind of quiet as before. Not the hollow silence of waiting. This was something else, a quiet of acceptance. Jack stole a glance at him. The boy was holding his teddy bear, but his grip wasn't as tight. He wasn't staring at the road, searching for something or someone that wasn't coming. He was just there. They pulled into the driveway, dust kicking up in the warm evening air. Jack put the truck in park and let out a long breath. Home, sweet home, he muttered. Ethan slid out of the truck and followed Jack inside, his small feet padding across the wooden floor. Everything was just as they left it. The old couch with its worn cushions, the scent of motor oil lingering in the air, the faint hum of the ceiling fan. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Jack tossed his keys on the table and turned to Ethan, leaning against the counter. You hungry, kid? Ethan thought for a second, then nodded. Jack grinned. Grilled cheese? A tiny smile played at Ethan's lips. Yeah. Jack pulled out a pan, buttered some bread, and got to work. The sound of sizzling filled the kitchen, the simple, familiar routine settling something inside him. After a while, he glanced over at Ethan. "You know something?" Ethan looked up mid-bite. Jack ruffled the kid's hair, the way he had done 100 times before, but somehow it meant more now. "Family isn't about who you're born to," Jack said, his voice steady. "It's about who shows up when you need them." Ethan blinked, letting the words sink in. Then for the first time in weeks, he smiled. A real smile. Jack saw it and felt something loosen in his chest. They weren't perfect. They weren't even sure where things would go from here. But for now, they were exactly where they were meant to be. Not every story has a perfect ending. Rachel's road to redemption is just beginning. Whether she chooses to fight for a better life or slips back into old habits, that's a battle only she can win. And Ethan? He may never fully understand why his mother left, but he's learning something just as important. Love isn't measured by words, but by actions. Jack didn't have to step in. He didn't have to take a scared little boy into his home or spend his time chasing down a woman who had given up on herself. But he did. Not because he had to, but because it was the right thing to do. This story isn't just about Rachel's mistakes or Ethan's pain. It's about the people who show up when no one else does. It's about the strangers who become family, the second chances that don't come easy, and the quiet, everyday acts of kindness that change lives in ways we may never fully understand. How many people have we walked past without a second glance? How often have we assumed someone else's struggle wasn't our problem? Jack could have done the same. He could have kept walking, but instead he stopped, and that made all the difference. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever seen an act of kindness that changed someone's life? Or maybe you've experienced one yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's remind the world that even in its darkest moments, there's always hope. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Thank you for being part of this journey, because at the end of the day, the world needs more people like Jack.